As we step into 2025, one thing is clear: de-dollarization is not stopping, it's accelerating. China and other BRICS nations are scared of President Trump, and it's making them more determined to reduce their dependence on the US dollar and establish themselves as a global economic superpower. Their secret weapon? Gold. In fact, China resumed buying gold. And you know what's even more telling? They underreport their buy. Doesn't it make you wonder why? They recognize its global value and its ability to withstand economic shocks. Gold is a global asset with innate value. It's tangible, reliable, and it's immune to economic manipulation. China and other BRICS countries want to be prepared. They just don't want it to be known. But this isn't about nations. It's about you. In a world of shifting economic power, gold is your personal hedge against uncertainty. That's why Noble Gold Investments can help you secure your financial future with gold. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today to learn more. And with a qualified account, receive 10 1-ounce silver American Eagle coins. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. And remember, there's always a risk of investment and there's no guarantee of any kind. Hello and welcome to the monthly podcast that we have with the one and only Mr. Alastair Macleod, who is a financial expert, is particularly in the European markets as it refers to banking, finance, and other things. And as always, he is gracious to join us to give us his insights on the global economy and even some of his impressions here stateside. If you are new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share, as it helps the channel grow and helps others to gain in the knowledge you are afforded. Mr. Macleod, how are you doing this evening?
Fine, thank you. Nice to be back on again, John.
Yeah, it's good to have you back as always. So as you know, we're both pressed for time, so I want to respect your time and I'll get right into it. A number of ways that we can slice this, as you know. But one of the things I was thinking about from our last podcast is the Doge effect. We talked about the Trump effect a little bit last time, but now we're really starting to see things starting to open up, particularly here stateside, and I would imagine in the whole of the world. So with President Trump and Elon Musk exposing a lot of the grift and malfeasance, particularly within the US aid, all the corruption, things that we've all known about for a while, now it's really starting to come to light, announcing that they're going to audit the Department of Education, the Pentagon, Medicare, Medicaid, and they're even going after the IRS, and rightly so. Do you see the Fed at some point being audited? Do you think when they do, they'll find corruption or additional nefarious activity? And if they do, what do you think the odds are that the Fed will ultimately be abolished?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. I don't think it'll be abolished. I'm not sure that, because the Fed is meant to be an independent entity, I'm not too sure whether, Elon Musk with his Doge actually has the authority or would be permitted to, apply the department. I was going to say audit, but that's not quite the right word. Audit the Fed, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I would discount that. I mean, if it happens, I would be very interested. Let's put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they should be able to run. The Fed should be able to run itself, I should think, on about a quarter of its staff. I mean, it's famous for having all these PhDs who basically have led the Fed up the wrong path. I mean, I would sack all those to start with. But anyway, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting one.
I agree. And I say this with all due respect, of course, but I respectfully disagree with you in a sense. I do think he has the authority because I think President Trump and the Treasury are giving him said authority. He's already starting to do that. The Fed has never been a part of the Constitution and has no Fed or reserves, as you are well aware. And I think there's going to be a lot of, for lack of a better word, grift and nefarious activity that has been uncovered for quite some time. So we're actually, when I say we, of course, the team are quite excited to see that, because I think the public has known something is wrong for some time, and now they're going to be able to see it, front and center. I'll give you a good example. You probably are aware of this, but something that we just discovered really interestingly enough, Alastair, is that DOGE is finding out through their various auditing practices that all the various governmental departments, out of the 36 trillion debt that's widely advertised, interestingly enough, Alastair, the public only owes 10 billion of that, of consumer debt. So couldn't he just pay that off and then remove the Fed altogether?
Well, I think one of the problems is that the notes in circulation are Fed notes, and the other thing is that the banks have deposits at the Fed. So you've got to deal with that as well. I mean, it's I don't think you can actually dismantle this paper mountain quite so easily. And what are you going to replace it with? Which is the other thing. I think it's actually quite complex, and I think messing around with this, I just fear it might have some unintended consequences. I mean, I'm no fan of the Fed, insofar as, well, we don't like central banks anyway. I think they're completely unnecessary, but we have them, and that's the fact. But I think as far as the Fed is concerned, their problem is one, I think, of following macroeconomic policy, which is completely wrong. They shouldn't be trying to manage the economy. But we've got to the point where the management of the economy is so intense that if they stop managing the economy, when this credit bubble bursts, which it is going to do, they always do eventually, there will be nobody to stop it. There will be nobody to offset the effects, and it would be a complete catastrophe. I mean, really what we're saying is that the Fed should stand back and just let everything happen. Now, I think that's the right thing to do, but the consequences will be so enormous. And not only that, but I don't think anyone's got the political mandate to permit that to happen.
Well, it's interesting. Thank you, Alastair, for that. It's interesting that you should bring that up because in my mind, there's a series of sub points that I think follows up to what you said. So let's take it a step at a time. You said your first point, I think if I heard you right, was what would they replace it with, right? Because it's been in place for over 53 years or something like that. And actually, I was talking about Nixon removing the gold standard, but if you go back to the Federal Reserve 1913, 112 years. So depending how you look at it, but interestingly enough, that actually segues to a question that might help address that. Let's see. So we've heard Judy Shelton talking a lot more about gold would set the new dollar straight. You've seen Musk is appointing, with his authority that's been given to that point, to that discussion. He is looking at getting Ron Paul, who's been a champion of auditing the Fed, the gold specifically for quite some time, longer than I've been in this. And so it looks like they're working together to do a proposal for a gold convertible treasury bond. And her plan is issuing a 50-year treasury bond that would be convertible into gold, aiming to address the current monetary system's shortcomings, as you said, and restore stability to the dollar. So couldn't he just, in essence, bake the Fed into the treasury, return the gold standard as constitutional money, thereby going back to the constitutional construct upon which we're founded?
Well, we would love to see it, but I don't think it's a painless return. I mean, one of the big questions, which we would all like answered, is, and remember, the gold it's only a gold note on the Fed's balance sheet. The gold is actually the property of the Treasury. Now, I'd like to know how much gold they've actually got. I mean, not only has it not been audited for a long time, we've just had to take the Treasury's word that it's there.
Right.
Now, this is actually terribly important because you can't do anything about, a gold convertible bond or whatever, without actually proving that you've got the gold there. Now, we do know that the Fed has been, not the Fed, sorry, but the US Treasury has been running a propaganda campaign, which included suppressing the price of gold by allowing leasing to go on, so that gold was sold into the market in order to pick up the return on US Treasuries. And that was going on from the mid-80s onwards, or early 80s, presumably. So that's, so the first question, and I think I'd be fascinated to know if Doge turns this up, what gold have they actually got? Yeah. And when it comes to looking at the Fed, I would be very interested to know how much gold the New York Fed is holding earmarked for other central banks, because we suspect, let's put it that way, let's put it no stronger than that, we suspect that there is a problem there, because otherwise they would have been able to deliver the gold to the Bundesbank on demand. And not only that, but when the Bundesbank quite reasonably decided to or requested to have an audit of its own, or visit its own property, as it were, they were denied that. I mean, so yes, let's have complete open disclosure on the gold side. Then we can talk about maybe returning to a gold standard for the dollar. The only problem with all this is that you put the dollar on a gold standard, you've also got to consider the geopolitical consequences, because we know that China has so much. I mean, I reckon between the state, its hidden reserves, and also the people, China has got somewhere between 25 and 35% of above ground gold stocks. I
Yeah.
mean, this is very, very big. Russia, we know what the central bank has got is what, about 2,500 tons. I haven't looked at it for a long time, but we also know there are two other wealth funds, one of which is a precious metals wealth fund.
Mhm.
And intelligence sources tell us that they've got around about 12,000 tons altogether, and they're ramping up their own mine production, and they're hoping to get it up to 500 tons a year. So, this is an area where America has got to, if he's going if Trump, or if the Treasury is going to stabilize the dollar by putting it on a gold standard, not only has it got to do it properly, but it's also got to establish beyond reasonable doubt that it actually does have the gold reserves in order to do it.
Mhm. Good point. And yeah, I agree. I think that's absolutely, Alastair, where this is all leading to is ultimately Ron Paul is being tasked to do this so that they can, in fact, audit the Fed and ostensibly show, as the old adage goes, that the emperor has no clothes. So then the
Yeah,
question begets, how much gold does America actually have and where is it? Big
yeah.
Square has an interesting thought about the Grand Canyon. There being a lot of plaster gold. I think he's probably onto something. There's more in other places than we know, because we know there's a glut throughout the world. And I want to answer your question, well, address your point about Doge. Taking it a step further, I want to show you something on the screen here, if you'll indulge me real quick.
Mm.
Let me see where it, just bear with me a second. I'm sorry, where it would be. Bear with me a second here. Sorry, let me stop that and get over to the right screen. Let's see, where would that be? Sorry, these be a little tricky with some of this stuff, so just bear with me. Okay, here we go. Let me know when you can see this.
Well, I can see a post which looks like it's on X. Yes.
Yeah, so this is Majid.
Yeah.
Yeah, on X. What was interesting, to the Doge point, this is as of yesterday, Elon Musk calls for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I know you're familiar with them,
Yep.
remaining account balance of over $700,586,670, excuse me, to be returned to the American
Mm.
taxpayers. And that's just one tranche. So that if they
Yeah.
recover, sorry.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. I hadn't seen that.
Yeah. Oh, really?
So,
Okay. I just
so,
assumed.
so this consumer protection fund, as it were, so 711 billion. I mean, that's a huge amount of money.
And that's just one tranche, Alistair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, let's hold that thought, because you made another really cogent point that I want to touch on with another example. So just bear with me. And that would be two things. I'll start with this one here, because you were talking about the gold and all that. So let's start with this. This came on the Kobisi letter on X, so I'm sure you're
Mhm.
familiar with. This is
Yep.
January CPI inflation expectations before President Trump took over. That's also important to denote. You can see that inflation is transitory around 2.8 to 3%. And all of these financial institutions, obviously, you're well heeled, particularly Barclays, of course, and BNP and others from your vast experience. So that's pretty fascinating. And then I wanted to show you this other one real quick. This is on the subject of gold production. So that leads me, Alistair, to my next question. With the tariff threat and the influx of gold and silver flooding in from European shores up your wheelhouse, what, in your opinion, is the future of the LMBA and COMEX? I've heard deliveries that normally take a day or two are now taking 4 to 8 weeks. To what do you attribute this?
Well, I mean, obviously, what happened for whatever reason, and we can probably go into that in a second,
Mhm.
there were huge premiums on COMEX futures. And it was that got gold moving out of other centers. I mean, even according to Reuters, even out of India into COMEX. Now,
Excuse me.
really, the real delays, I think, have been with the Bank of England. Now, that I think is interesting for one particular reason, and that is that the Bank of England, so far as we're aware, does not store very much gold for commercial entities. banks and commercial entities. It is predominantly central banks and maybe a bit of liquidity for outfits like the Bank of International Settlements and so on and so forth. So, where's all this gold coming from? It looks to me like this is gold which has been leased, which is now leaving the vaults. The point here basically is that with a normal leasing arrangement, what it involves is that it just literally transfers on a book entry from party A to party B. It doesn't leave the vault. So party B, which has leased the gold, can then go along and use the certificate that it actually owns the gold in the Bank of England vault. It can use that as collateral for other operations. Now, they're actually taking delivery this time, which if they've leased it, they would be entitled to do. I just wonder whether the central banks whose gold it is, would be sort of thinking, well, hold on a minute, are we going to get this back? And it's actually, I think, a very important question, because it's gold leasing which has created the big hole in central bank gold going way back. And interestingly, I had one of my Substack followers sent me a note, or I've got a sort of chat channel on it, and he was saying that he was at the I think it was Drexel Burnham meeting when they had to tell a central banker who had flown over for the meeting that their gold had gone. Now, what was interesting was that there was absolutely no adjustment in the central bank's gold reserves to account for the fact that the gold wasn't there. Wow. And I think this is probably quite normal practice, unfortunately, because I think that central banks take the advice of an old Chinese problem. The rich man sits on the hole in the carpet to hide his defects. And I think this is what they're doing. It's a world which is so opaque, and in the private sector we would call it fraudulent, but because it's government, of course, it's not fraudulent. They're above the law, I suppose.
So they think.
The whole of this thing. But okay, so why is it that this stuff has gone to COMEX? Well, I'm convinced that it has a lot to do with the stands for delivery. Normally with a stand for delivery, what happens is that your gold maybe remains with one of the big houses who you've stood for delivery against, whether it's JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, whoever.
As we enter 2025, de-dollarization is accelerating. China and BRICS nations are reducing their dependence on the US dollar, and their secret weapon, gold. China's buying gold, quietly underreporting their purchases. Why? Because they know gold's global value, its ability to withstand economic shocks, and its immunity to manipulation. This isn't just about nations, it's about you. Gold is your personal hedge against uncertainty. Noble Gold Investments can help you secure your financial future with gold. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com now, and with a qualified account, receive 10 1-ounce silver American Eagle coins. Remember, there's a risk of investment and there's no guarantee of any kind.
They say, well, here's a certificate that we're actually holding gold for you. Now, this is a credit. It's just like an unallocated note, if you like. Now, there comes a point, however, when foreigners in particular might be somewhat concerned about the change of government. And what we have seen, certainly, as an acceleration since the election back in November, an acceleration in the stands for delivery. They have actually been massive. I've calculated that since 2001, in the 4 years since 2001 to 2004, over 2,000 tons of gold have stood for delivery. Now, since January the 1st, the rate at which the stands for delivery have continued has been at the rate of 2,000 tons. If you annualize it so far, I mean, we're looking at the first 6 weeks of this year. If it continues at this rate, there's going to be 2,000 tons stood for delivery. Now, I think what's happening is that the people who are stood for delivery and have been, if you like, fobbed off with a certificate, don't worry, old chap, we've got your gold. I think what they're doing is they're now saying, we want our gold.
Yeah.
And interestingly, there was a man who worked for Sprott, and he sent he did a posting on X, which was picked up by Garter, the Gold Antitrust Action Group, where he described the process of standing for delivery for silver. It was something which was meant to take 5 days, and it took 9 months for Sprott to get its gold.
Wow.
9 months. And I mean, in that posting, he went into some detail about all the obfuscations and everything else that was going on. So you can see that, I mean, I've always suspected that if an American entity stands for delivery on COMEX, he'll be blackballed by the big operators on COMEX. He wouldn't be able to deal again. So on that basis, you can see that an American entity probably wouldn't stand for delivery and really want the delivery. But if you get a foreigner, he doesn't give a damn. He wants possession.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want just ownership. He wants possession as well. And I think that's really what has been going on. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that a foreigner's gold leaves the COMEX warehouses. It goes into, say, one of the vaulting companies' facilities rather than held by, one of the big banks and, sort of evidenced by some sort of piece of paper. So I think that's the basis of it. And of course, it's cleaned out the liquidity virtually everywhere else. And interestingly, the swaps have managed to get the open interest on the COMEX gold contract right down. I mean, it was close to 600,000. It's now about, I don't know, 525, 530,000. So that has reduced their obligations to the rest of the market quite a bit. But of course, the price has risen. And looking at the way the price is performing, it looks to me as if there is a growing understanding, which is spreading from the big money, if you like, that what's going on in the world is actually extremely disruptive for credit as a whole. We've got a potential credit crisis as a result of tariffs, Trump's, whatever, all these things being brought ahead. Right. To a head. So where do you want to be? You don't want to be in credit. You want to get out into real money. And I think there's a growing understanding of just how important this is.
No, I think you're right in the sense that we're seeing it here stateside, at least from the people I talked to. I just had another subject matter expert on our podcast yesterday. I'm sure you might know him. And he said in the 40 something years he's been doing this, he's never seen the buying. It's unprecedented with gold. People are, they're not doing the naked shorting anymore. Everything is being more transparent, right? For a whole host of reasons, what you discussed, and we haven't even touched on the blockchain and the digital aspect of that with Doge and where that's headed vis-a-vis XRP, et cetera, which is a factor into consideration. But you also have people wanting to take physical possession because if you don't touch it, you don't own it. And particularly if we are, in fact, which I think we are, going back to a constitutional sound money gold standard, which we should have never gotten off of, but it is what it is. And we're undoing the past. And you see that also, Alastair, as reflexive in the price of gold. I think as of today, 29.29, and it's touching that 3,000 mark, which I think we all sort of anticipated, but it's now starting to pick up steam, which would seem to suggest it's going to continue further. Before I go to my next question, let's touch on another important point, Alastair, you made prior with respect to China. I think you said something in the area of 30 to 35% the gold holding or something?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the way I would assess it is that, and I know that China has been accumulating gold off balance sheet, as it were, for a considerable time, really going back to 1983, when the People's Bank of China was actually appointed by law to handle the nation's gold and silver dealings, reserve dealings, whatever. Since then, I reckon that by 2002, they'd already accumulated somewhere between 20 and 25,000 tons, at which point they decided that they had got the bulk of what they needed, and they would therefore permit and encourage the people to begin to accumulate gold and silver, because until then, they weren't allowed to possess it. And so that was when the Shanghai Gold Exchange was opened. So that was, what, 22 years ago now. And I think that, I mean, we know from the withdrawals that Chinese individuals, you know, the public, as it were, both jewelry and also small bars and that sort of stuff, have withdrawn around about 25, 26,000 tons. Now, I haven't got the exact figure, but it's of that sort of magnitude. On top of that, there is vaulted gold, which hasn't left the SG, you know, the Shanghai Gold Exchange vaulting system, which is held, if you like, on behalf of banks and institutions, and particularly banks who offer gold accounts to individual Chinese. So, you know, if you add it all up, and given also that China has been the largest miner by output for nearly 2 decades now, what we have is we have an accumulation of gold there, which I think could easily be in the region of 60, 70, 75,000 tons. And then, of course, if we talk about the Asian hegemons, we've also got Russia, and they're going down the same route. They're a long way behind. They're a smaller population, but nonetheless, I think that officially, with the stroke of a pen, they could move the gold, which is in the sovereign wealth funds, onto the balance sheet of the Central Bank of Russia, and hey presto, there would be 12,000 tons back in the ruble. So, you know, this is the world which we're now dealing with. Now, I think the point you raise about Doge, looking at you know, the Treasury, you know, and the Fed and all the rest of it, I think is absolutely fascinating, because only when we know the answer to those inquiries do we know just what problems the dollar actually faces. But until then, you know, I think the principal concern has to be that the world is in the biggest credit bubble ever seen, led by the dollar, and credit bubbles always burst. They always go pop. I mean, this makes the South Sea bubble, the Mississippi bubble, tulipomania look like chicken feed. I mean, it really is that important. Now, you won't have seen it in US stocks, but if you look at what's happened to stock indices in Europe, UK, Germany, Italy, not France, Spain, they are through the roof. I mean, you know, they've just soared in recent days. Recent months, really. So, you know, this is indicative of the top end of a bubble. I mean, it's failing in dollars, but it's still running in the other currencies.
Yeah.
When that bursts, I tell you, there's going to be all hell will break loose.
Agreed. And I'm going to touch on that in a moment before I ask you my last question. So just to kind of tie in everything you've discussed so well, one of the things that we believe, Alastair, is that there's sort of an X factor with respect to China. We know that they're hoarding gold for a number of reasons, improve their positions, particularly with their influential sphere at BRICS, right? That's its own little tranche. We showed you the Doge information, which you said you hadn't seen before, and that is part of a sovereign wealth fund, to your point. And there's many more tranches to come. I think we're going to see that as we see things precipitate in the coming weeks and months ahead. But I think the other aspect, before I go to my last question for today, Alastair, is that China, I think, surreptitiously, like you said, is buying gold off balance sheets, and Japan's doing the same thing. A lot of countries are. And I think one of the key things, President Trump is holding their feet to the fire with legislation with respect to a lot of the investments that China had with the US back in the early 1900s, 13s, such as the Chinese bonds, the CMKX. England, as you may be aware, in 1987, the Queen made China make good on those bonds. So there is a precedent, and we think that's coming back again because President Trump said that China was going to have to pay back at least 10 trillion. And that number now is probably estimated to be closer to 25, because like you said, at least. So because of, as they amass more gold, I think it's to cover their short positions on what they owe us in these aforementioned areas. So that being said, Alastair, the last question I ask you for today, to respect your time, is do you think that the tariff threat is just a cover for something else that's really going on? For example, you mentioned the London vaults running out of metals, or a monetization of gold that's coming, like perhaps gold-backed bonds with Trump, the administration, forcing the US government, Fed agents, and the bullion banks to bring back the metal back to the US. And then they're using this tariff narrative to not give the game away or maybe cause that panic you were talking about?
I don't actually see it,
Okay.
really, for a number of reasons. I mean, we've gone into the problem as to exactly what gold the U.S. Treasury has, and what the New York Fed has on behalf of foreign central banks. That's the first point. I think the second point is that intellectually, the Western world runs on macroeconomics, and they are gold deniers. There would have to be a huge, great volte-face in economics and economic thinking to go with going back on a gold standard. I just don't see it. I don't see it being led in the West. I see it happening. I mean, in Russia, there is a clear advantage to the Russians going back onto a gold standard. My view is the only reason that they are not back on a gold standard is because of their relationship with China. China takes a more, if you like, standing back view of the geopolitical situation and the consequences of going on to a gold standard. I mean, if, let us say, China went on to a gold standard, or even Russia went on to a gold standard, it would be a financially nuclear event. It really would destabilize the fiat currency world. So I think China is taking the view that we want to get out of the dollar. And it's important to note that when the central bank buys gold, it's not actually buying gold, it's selling dollars. That's the emphasis which we've got to place on that policy. But when it comes to putting the yuan onto a gold standard, they will only do that to protect themselves from a collapse in the dollar. Mm-hmm. So I think that is something that is ahead of us, and hopefully it won't happen. But I'm beginning to think it's virtually impossible for it not to happen, because of the expansion of credit, which has just been absolutely enormous, and that this time I think will cause a crisis. I'm very interested in what you're saying actually about what D.O.G.E is finding. It raises the question really as to whether they can more or less cover the budget deficit out of these savings. That I think is something which is going to be an increasing topic of conversation in the coming weeks. And it is very important because this very high budget deficit is one of the principal drivers of the debasement of the currency. So, that I think is a very important point. Now, having said that, the other important driver of the debasement of the currency is the faith foreigners have in it. If foreigners don't have faith in it, it's not good.
Well, we don't even have faith in it, so I imagine what they must have. But yeah, you're exactly right. And to your point, Alastair, I think what ultimately this is leading to is an east-west reset, where it's going from the west to east, right, with the BRICS. And I do think from the people we're talking to in our team, and then folks like yourself that are sort of, backing up the veracity of it, that I think a reset's inevitable. We just can't go the way we've been going. It's unsustainable. It's untenable, to your point. And it looks like somewhere between, from the projections we can ascertain at this point, March to June would be a reasonable timetable, particularly as you see President Trump meeting with Putin that you mentioned before on the gold standard, ramping up, they're working in synchronicity together. So that, coupled with other things, seems to us to suggest that the US is going to have to debunk the Federal Reserve dollar and go back into a US asset-backed note backed by precious metals, gold, silver certificates, but actual physical metals. Because as you said, if you don't touch it, you don't own it. So I appreciate your analytics on that. As we close for today, Alastair, we'll post your Substacks as always, but please talk about where people can find your work and what advice or final thoughts you have for today.
Yes, it's basically Macleod Finance. If you Google that, it should take you to my Substack page, which actually is alastairmacleod.substack.com. And the point about it is that it's a source of information, it's a source of education. I feel it's particularly important for people to understand the difference between money and credit. there is huge danger in the quantity of credit which is in existence and the malinvestments that are all hidden in it. And, I'm fascinated that there's a journalist, an American journalist, returned the other day. And I think this confirms that there are decent back channel talks between America and Russia, which is very, very good news. I don't know that. I don't think Putin is going to give much away. I don't know what the American side will be thinking of in terms of negotiating over Ukraine. But I think from America's point of view, it just needs to butt out of there. And I think they will. Middle East is difficult. I think that that is really tricky, and I can't see how America can back out of that one. But having said that, I think you're right, because as America begins to concentrate on North America, from Panama to Greenland, if you like, I think that the rest of the world can sort of get on with aligning itself more behind the Asian hegemons, and particularly China, which I think is going to be a source of infrastructure investment around the world. I would welcome this development, and as long as it can happen without too much friction and diplomatic discontent and problems, then I think out of this some good may come.
I agree. I just want to read a couple of things, Alastair, since you brought up the good points about President Trump and Putin. This just came up on our feed, as a matter of fact. President Trump has announced says Russia will be releasing another American prisoner tomorrow following the talks with Putin's Kremlin. To your point, U.S. says Ukraine will not join NATO and troops will be deployed to Ukraine. Also, to your point, they're starting negotiations on each other's nations. Zelensky says he's ready to achieve peace with Russia following a conversation with President Trump, ironically. And
he's got no option, but anyway.
Exactly. But they have to go with the narrative, as you know.
Yeah.
And finally, what's interesting is a federal judge just ruled that President Trump does in fact have the authority to freeze and or limit federal funding, which is a huge win for him and DOGE. So there's things popping off as we speak, because the news is happening so precipitously. But we'll definitely get your links in the description for the Substack. It is a noteworthy read, and I know my viewers and yours appreciate the cogency of your content and your experiential knowledge. So, Alastair, thank you for joining the podcast, good sir. Once again, we appreciate it. Look forward to having you on shortly, and we will see what transpires between now and the next time we get together.
Indeed, it's getting very interesting, John, and I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Take care. Have a great day.